First question for tonight goes, is it wrong to mourn the death of a parent? Isn't the act of crying a recognition of the nature of suffering?
Yeah, good question. Well, it can be, as I was saying about the students of the Buddha in the time of the Buddha. When somebody dies, somebody you know, somebody you love, it's a sad thing. There's no way around that. Nobody wants it. But whether you can see it in the light of Dhamma, with the Dhamma eye, with wisdom or not, well, that depends on how well developed your mind is. Often when we lose people that we love, the main suffering, if you look carefully, observe carefully, you might notice it's really more our own suffering of we've lost somebody we love. That person makes us happy and now we've lost them. So there's a certain selfishness to that when we still have attachment and clinging, and our mind is not yet fully free from attachment. And there's a certain selfishness in it, in the sadness, which is part of the reason we feel sad and struggle maybe with the sadness and grief of losing someone. So it's part of our practice to keep contemplating the fact that all of us, me, you, everyone, will one day won't be here. We all get old, sick, and die, some sooner, some later. That's normal. And a well-adjusted mind with right view maybe can get to the point where it can accept it and be at peace with it. Doesn't mean to say it's not sad. It's not seeing the Dhamma, having right view, understanding impermanence makes you cold-hearted and not caring. You still care. You care about relationships, say to parents or grandparents or friends, relatives. You care and you still have kindness, compassion. You're aware of your relationships. So if someone who's had a big influence on your life in a good way dies, then that's a very sad thing and you're going to feel something probably. But at the same time, it's also possible to come to accept impermanence and know that, all of us must die, so that the mind is completely in line with that truth and not deluded and not, hoping somehow that we won't die. Like, when somebody goes to hospital, we generally say an older person and they're sick, they go to hospital. Generally, we only have one thought, isn't it? We want, if it's someone we love, we want them to get better, to be free from their illness and get out. But that doesn't always happen, does it? Somebody goes to hospital with a serious illness or old age. Some of those people don't get out of hospital. They die in hospital. Can we accept that? Can we accept the possibility of our own death or the death of our loved ones? How much have we contemplated that? And you'll find people who contemplate a lot, reflect on this a lot, well, they tend to be more adjusted. Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants their loved ones to die. But whether you can accept it because you understand impermanence or not, that's a different question. In Thailand, one of the nice things about living in a Buddhist community in Thailand, as a monk, there's thousands of monks in Thailand, is that many monks of ages, different ages, and some monks I know, they get sick and they die. And monk, because they're encountering that all the time in their social group, or knowing many monks, you'll know some monks who are close to death, or you'll be around or hear that some monks have died. It becomes a very normal thing to reflect on death and not to get caught up into the grief, and not to deny that it's a sad thing, but just to see it as just a normal part of life. It's that sooner or later we die. So when people, like if you live in northeast Thailand, where people's lifespan is quite short, shorter than the average people around the world, they're very used to the fact that, you know, their friends and relatives might die on them at any time. Serious disease is more widespread. Healthcare is less well developed, less available. Whether it's monks or just lay people in the villages, people are, I think, perhaps a little bit more open to the idea of death and accept it. So when they meet each other, one of the ways they greet each other is they say, "Oh, you haven't died yet." And they genuinely mean that when they say it, because it could happen. You go away from your village for a while. When you come back, almost certainly someone you know will have died. People die every day. Monasteries are the same. I go back to Thailand every year, and one of the questions you ask is, you know, who's left, who's died, who's left from the monks I know. The more you contemplate it, the more you bring your mind in line with the truth is that we must all die, because the human body is just another physical entity that doesn't last forever. And that doesn't take away the fact that that person you love, you know, it's sad when they go, but you're also cushioning or supporting your mind by thinking in line with the truth, is that everybody is impermanent.
Sadhu Luang Por. Next question. Dear Ajahn, what is the purpose of chanting?
Well, there's many purposes. One can be just to teach you the Dhamma or remind you of the Dhamma. So like one chant I do regularly when I receive my food is one from the funeral chants. I go, Anicca Vata Sankhara. All conditions are impermanent. Because you eat a meal of food, that's one of the contemplations, isn't it? However delicious the food is, it's impermanent. It doesn't last. The pleasure doesn't last. Food comes into your bowl or onto your plate, and it goes into your mouth, into your belly, and then it's gone. It's impermanent. So that's a little chant we do sometimes in the monastery, sometimes at funerals, as a very good reflection. And it can bring up mindfulness, it can bring up wisdom and understanding. So every chant you do, every thing you recite will have a meaning, whether you recite in your own language or in Pali, the language of the Buddha. There'll be some good meaning to it. So reminding yourself of the meaning of different teachings, different reflections is very useful. Can also be a way to develop mindfulness. You chant, if your mind is focused on the words you're chanting, you're remembering them, you're concentrating on that chant, then as long as the words are coming out of your mouth correctly and there's sound, then one thing is it means you're still alive. You haven't died yet. Another thing is it means you're mindful. You're concentrating on that chant. And when the words stop, or you garble them or forget them and miss them, then you're not mindful, are you? Or when you get distracted and start thinking of something else, you're not mindful. So it's a very good way to train your mind in mindfulness. By chanting, you get both the meaning and you get the opportunity to practice mindfulness with the recitation, the sound, the words. So monks will often learn chants over and over again, maybe for many hours at a time, sometimes learning suttas, verses of protection, reflections, because it's not only the meaning you're getting, but it's also a way of training your mind to be present in the moment with the chant that you do. If you're sleepy and you're practicing chanting, well, you know if the sound stops, that means you've fallen asleep. If the sound is still coming out of your mouth, you're not asleep yet. It's as simple as that. If you're sitting watching the breath, then you could say, oh, you can't tell, can you? Sometimes you're so dull that you think you're with the breath, and you feel fairly peaceful, but actually you're just dull or drowsy and you don't really know. Might be quite a while before you sort of fully wake up and realize you were drifting off, dozing or asleep. But if you're chanting, you're much quicker to be mindful and aware if you fall into sleepiness or you're distracted, thinking about something or looking at something. You're chanting, the words of your chant stop, and you've lost your concentration, your mindfulness. That's a very good practice for times when you are easily distracted, when you're worried, when you're sleepy, when you're thinking a lot about something. You can use chanting to get through that and help you let go. So I'd recommend it as an accompaniment, an additional practice with meditation. As we practice training this mind, it's good to have different techniques: the walking meditation, the sitting meditation, meditation on the breath, chanting different reflections, the cultivation of loving kindness. There's a few different things we use at different times. And I would encourage you to experiment in that way. You learn from the different tools of the meditator that we can use to train your mind.
Sarah Lumpur. Another question. Lumpur, as you said, we must learn to accept what we don't like and that we can't change things. I tend to preempt problems and mitigate risks so as to ensure a better outcome. I don't think that's right either. What is the right view then?
Well, we're always practicing the middle way for the end of suffering. So up to a point, mitigating risks, thinking ahead, being alert to danger is not wrong. It can be quite useful and it can be part of the practice. It can be quite a wise thing, can't it? When you cross the road, you look to see if there's any car coming. And if a car is coming, you don't cross the road. I think the Buddha would say that's correct. There's no point taking unnecessary risks. But at the same time, in some areas of life, we overdo it, don't we? We become so risk averse and so trying to control everything and so careful that we end up, being full of anxiety and fear. We can't do many things. For example, sometimes there's something that we could really learn from and benefit from, but we won't do it because we're worried that there may be some risk involved, some danger, some difficulty. So it's a balance, isn't it? A simple one might be like today we had 5 men went forward and became monks and novice monks in the monastery. Some people won't do that because they're risk averse. They say, oh, it's too difficult. Not having my money, only eating 1 meal a day, staying in the forest. Oh, there's too many dangers and risks, or it's just going to be too difficult, too challenging. I can't do that. I can't live in a hut in the forest without electricity and all my home comforts, blah, blah, blah. So they may be somebody who has some faith in the Buddhist teachings, but doesn't want to try something like ordination. Or some people might be like the same for going on a meditation retreat. They think, oh, it's just too simple, too difficult, keeping the 8 precepts. I'm going to miss this, miss that, won't have this, won't have that. So they don't even try it, don't risk it, don't try it. So they miss out. So sometimes in the course of our practice, doing things that are good for us and learning new things, we do have to take a bit of managed or reasonable risk. But at other times, it's correct to avoid risk. The Buddha didn't say put yourself in danger just for the sake of it. So even like the sort of things you hear monks doing, sometimes you hear monks go and stay in a lonely graveyard at night, or they go and stay in a tiger-infested forest. They may do that when they're ready for it. Your risk is something you learn about through experience. So when you're brand new to the practice, you don't do things that are very risky. You don't go and stay in the malaria infested forest. Maybe you don't go and stay where the tigers can attack you. You don't go somewhere where you'll be so afraid of ghosts that you'll go crazy. You might not do that, and your teacher might say, no, don't do that, it's too risky, you're not ready for it. And that's reasonable because you maybe are new and inexperienced in the practice. But maybe later on you have more mindfulness, more wisdom, more understanding, more patience and endurance, more energy in your practice. Then you may take on more. So you try going off to the malaria infested forest or the ghost owned cave or the whatever it is. You might try a few different things because you're more ready for it. But even then, the Buddha didn't encourage us to be foolish and just take risks for the sake of it. There's no purpose to that. If you do take a risk, it maybe just it happens to be part of that thing. So like something like disease, you can never have a world completely free from disease. So maybe sometimes you go off to a place where there's some, dengue fever or malaria, and you just accept, well, you may have to risk that. Or sometimes, in life, you take on a new challenge, and there may be some risk. Learning to drive a car involves a certain amount of risk, but most people are willing to take that, and they manage the risk. You try to be safe and careful and learn to drive a car, following the instructions, and hopefully things go well for you. But there'll be some risk, but it's an allowable, you might say, a reasonable risk. So I think you have to kind of look at these things and see where your risk averseness or your desire to control or get rid of all risk, all danger becomes an attachment and becomes a cause of suffering in itself, where you overdo it. And that you'll have to see in your own life, won't you? Your own walk of life, your own practice, where that might come up. But keep observing yourself to see where, and sometimes ask yourself, am I over attached here? Am I too anxious, too fearful, too worried? That may apply sometimes.
So, another question. Dear Lumpur, is it important where we place the attention on the body during anapanasati, such as at the tip of the nose or the forehead?
Yeah, I think if you're brand new to it, you need to experiment a bit. So Ajahn Chah, our teacher, used to say, well, there's three popular places, but it's not entirely limited to these three locations in the body, but they're the most popular. The tip of the nostrils, the center of the chest, between the lungs, and the abdomen. So when you begin following the feeling, the sensation of the in and out breath, well, follow the movement from the tip of the nostrils, drawing breath in, observing the lungs, the center of the chest, and then the point in the abdomen. And you'll notice the arising, falling of the abdomen, the swelling, the expanding, the deflating lungs, the movement, the sensation of air in and out at the breath, at the tip of the nostrils. You'll notice these things. These are places where it's relatively easy to pick up on these sensations, but you have to experience for yourself and find out what works for you. And probably the clue is where you're feeling most comfortable, because meditation, after a while, at first it's challenging and your mind is easily distracted and there's difficulties, but after a while your aim is to feel comfortable as you meditate, physically and mentally comfortable. So you've got to find a spot to focus on where you start to feel comfortable. And you may not feel peaceful, comfortable all the time, and you certainly won't be mindful all the time. In the beginning, our mindfulness is not well developed, but if you've had a meditation where you've started to feel quite comfortable, relaxed, mindful at one of these points, then that's maybe a clue that that could work for me, and you pick that point for further meditations. You could focus on the forehead. It's not wrong, but many people find after a while that focusing on the forehead can lead to problems. Sometimes they get some physical discomfort. Like when you really concentrate, you start to get a little bit of pain or even a headache. Sometimes they find it hard for the mind to really settle down and be mindful by focusing in that point. But you experiment for yourself. There's no one simple version that fits all. Your aim is to find a location that works for you, where your mindfulness starts to improve and becomes more continuous, and where you feel comfortable in your practice.
Sadhu Lumpo. Next question. Dear Ajahn, I was reading your book and you mentioned the period when you committed to not lie down and practiced for almost 4 years. What was the purpose of that practice, and can you share more of that experience?
Excuse me. In brief, to not be lazy. I wanted to find ways. I was always looking for ways, particularly in the early years of my practice, how to bring up energy, not be lazy. And before I even began meditating as a layman, I noticed I probably slept more than I needed, lay down in bed too much, lay in bed in the mornings, slept in late, too much. So I realized there's probably more I could do once I started meditating, learning the Buddhist teachings, putting them into practice. I reflected that there's probably more I could do in terms of sleeping a bit less and finding ways to bring up energy in the practice. So one of them that I experimented with, having met other teachers who had done it, was to practice not lying down, only use what we call 3 postures: standing, sitting, or walking, but not lying down. And Ajahn Chah encouraged us to do that once a week on the Buddhist lunar observance days, the full moon, half moon days, for a night. So I was doing that anyway once a week. And I found that quite good for bringing up effort, energy. If only it would help with coughs as well, but it doesn't help with coughs. I found it helpful for bringing up energy, mindfulness, developing samadhi, developing insight as well. Because when you stay up all night and you don't lie down, well, you naturally are more alert. You notice more about yourself, your thoughts, your feelings. Various attachments come up, sometimes very strongly, but you have a chance to see them and work through them. So I found doing that once a week was already quite beneficial for my practice. So then I wanted to extend it. I thought, I'm young. At that time, I was in my 20s, reasonably healthy, reasonably strong. So I thought, well, I'll try it, just not lying down at all. It doesn't mean to say not sleeping, but I would sleep sitting up, usually just leaning against a post or the wooden wall of my kuti, the hut in the forest. And so I would sleep not that much. If you sleep sitting up, you wake up quite easily. So I did that for a number of years as a way just to practice sleeping enough, but not too much. So I put more effort into sitting and walking meditation, sleep just enough what I needed. And I didn't find it maybe particularly ill or anything, but I did have problems with neck muscles because, sometimes your neck goes in a funny position. Sometimes I had problems with my legs because I tended to sit in the meditation posture when I was asleep. So sometimes that led to trouble. But generally, I could do it. Physically, I could do it. And then mentally, I was learning, how to develop more effort, endurance. And as I said, particularly going deeper into maintaining mindfulness in all states of mind. Because if you do the sitters practice, you don't lie down. There'll be times when your mind throws up different moods, um, delusions, uh, desires, attachments, stress, frustrations, all kinds of stuff will be thrown up maybe a little bit more than usual because of the practice. And then I was contemplating all that, letting go of attachments. You might say, in some small way, burning off various desires and attachments, the causes of suffering. However, in the long run, I found that it did make me a bit more tired physically than, if you lie down and have a rest when you lie down. So in the end, I gave up because I thought I would just have to manage any laziness and indulgence that I had in another way without putting so much pressure on my body. So after about 4 years, I gave up that practice, but I didn't give it up totally. I just gave up doing it every night. And I might just do 1 or 2 nights a week. And then other nights, I would lie down and have my rest in the lying down posture.
Sadhu Lumpur. Next question. Lumpur, I wish you well. When unpleasant things happen, is the right view to understand and accept it, then try to solve the problem? What happens if we have to do something unpleasant that may hurt the other party to address it? For example, a staff member constantly underperforming and you have to ask the person to leave. Thank you.
Well, the Buddha encouraged us to ground our actions in metta, goodwill, and right view. So the intention is not to create bad karma for yourself, for others, not to harm yourself, not to harm others. So I've never been in the position of being an employer, really. I'm a monk. I do teach as a monk, but I would imagine if you're an employer or a supervisor in some role in a job, you don't just um, sack or fire someone straight away, do you? You tell them what their job is. You remind them if they're not getting it or they don't understand or they're not doing it. If they're underperforming, as it were, you remind them what they should be doing, what the expectation is, out of kindness and obviously a desire for the job to be done well, you explain to them up to a point, and then if they're not getting it, they're not doing it, they're stubborn or they have their reasons, their problems, maybe you have to give them warnings and then point out what the consequences would be. So if you actually get to the point where you have to have that person leave the employment, it hasn't just come out of the blue, it's come through a reasonable process where they're warned and things are explained, things are warned, and then finally the final consequence is they have to leave. So you're trying to be as fair as you can with them, and you have kindness, and you still wish them well when they leave. You hope that they find some other job maybe that suits them more, better. But you also have to see other people's needs as well. So say it's a company, well, a company might affect many people. So if one person is not performing, not doing their job properly, other people may be affected and suffering as well, not just this person. So you have to see the big picture sometimes, and someone has to speak for all these other people as well, and look out for them. Or if it's handled well, sometimes you let someone go and you say, look, this is why we're letting you go, because you're not doing this right or whatever. You at least give them a chance to learn from the situation. But whether they learn or not, change or not, that's up to them. So, when you practice metta and I guess business and economics, there's different people, different factors involved. It's not a simple, clear-cut thing always. It's not always only one person is affected. Maybe many people are affected. So you have to try and look at the whole picture as well. Try and keep the metta, the goodwill in your mind as you're doing your job.
Sadhu Luang Por. Next question. Dear Luang Por, is it important to meditate until I enter the different stages of jhana? How do I do so? Thank you, Luang Por.
Yeah, do it a lot. That's what the Buddha said. Bhavita bahulikata, do it a lot. Practice mindfulness a lot. Sitting a lot, walking a lot. If you're doing breath meditation, do it a lot. The whole point is you're developing the skill in bringing up and maintaining mindfulness on an object. And this will give your mind this firmness and stillness and brightness that you can then use to contemplate and see impermanence in physical and mental phenomena, and ultimately to see not self. So if you can attain jhana, all the better. If you can attain fourth jhana, even better. You go as far as you can with this and do it as the best you can. And we always need to do more. We have this sort of shyness. We always think, oh, I must have done enough now in my meditation. We should do the opposite. We say, probably I should do more. I would take that as a default kind of way of thinking about it. I probably should do more meditation. I should probably do it longer, do more, give up more time for this meditation. Because most people err on the side of doing too little. So yes, do more.
Sadhu Luang Por. Are there any other questions?
As you can see, I've got a cough tonight, so maybe we'll leave it there. But nice to talk to you, and apologize for poor sound quality. Can blame the Melbourne winter for that. But anyway, hope to see you again next time. And in the meantime, we wish you happy meditation.